Let me be direct with you from the outset because what unfolded in the Strait of Hormuz in the last 36 hours is not a maritime incident. It is not a diplomatic skirmish. It is not another headline that will fade by tomorrow morning. What we are witnessing is the collapse of British naval authority in the most strategic waterway on Earth, and the implications of this collapse will reshape energy markets, military doctrine, and Western foreign policy for the next decade. I am looking at maritime tracking data that has been circulating among defense analysts for the past 18 hours. This data shows the movement patterns of HMS Duncan, a Type 45 destroyer, Britain's most advanced air defense warship. What it shows is not an aggressive interception. It is not a tactical pursuit. What it shows is a British warship maintaining a distance of 22 nautical miles from the seizure location while Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast boats surrounded and boarded the British-flagged tanker Heritage Explorer carrying 42,000 tons of crude oil bound for Rotterdam. 22 nautical miles. That is not tactical positioning. That is spectating. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly why this seizure represents the end of Britain's ability to protect its commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf, why London's so-called urgent response is a diplomatic performance designed to hide military impotence, and why this incident confirms what military strategists have been warning about for 3 years, but nobody wanted to hear. This is the reality of asymmetric naval warfare in 2026. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively debated in the British Ministry of Defense at this very moment. Let's start with geography because it explains everything. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. The shipping lanes that supertankers use are even narrower, roughly 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. To put that in perspective, that is approximately the width of the Hudson River in New York City. Now imagine trying to defend commercial traffic in a river while fast attack boats operate from both banks, with coastal anti-ship missile batteries covering every square meter of water, and diesel-electric submarines sitting silently on a seabed that averages just 50 meters deep. The strait is not open ocean. It is a maritime choke point where conventional naval superiority means almost nothing. HMS Duncan, despite being equipped with the most advanced radar systems Britain has ever deployed, cannot defend against 12 fast boats approaching simultaneously from multiple vectors at speeds exceeding 50 knots. The British Royal Navy knows this. The US Navy knows this. Iran knows this. And now, after yesterday, every shipping company in the world knows this. According to Lloyd's List, one of the most authoritative sources in maritime intelligence, insurance premiums for tankers transiting Hormuz increased by 17% within 6 hours of the Heritage Explorer seizure. 17% in 6 hours. That is not market volatility. That is a collective recognition by the global shipping industry that the rules have fundamentally changed. Bloomberg reported this morning that at least 8 additional British-flagged tankers have altered course to avoid the strait entirely, rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 3 weeks and approximately $2 million in additional fuel and operational costs per voyage. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what actually happened yesterday, because the official statements from London and Tehran are both incomplete. Announcement number 1, the seizure was not spontaneous. It was planned, coordinated, and executed with precision that demonstrates months of preparation and intelligence gathering. And this one matters more than anything else because it reveals that Iran has been tracking British commercial shipping patterns in real time and building operational profiles for every vessel that transits the Gulf. At Sarcho 4:17 UTC yesterday morning, the Heritage Explorer, a 157,000-ton Suezmax tanker registered in the UK but operated by a Norwegian shipping consortium, entered Iranian territorial waters while navigating the southbound traffic lane. According to multiple independent maritime analysts who reviewed the AIS tracking data, the vessel was approximately 400 meters inside the boundary of Iran's 12 nautical mile territorial limit. 400 meters. That is roughly 4 football fields. Within 11 minutes, 8 Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast boats designated as Peykap class and Siraj class vessels, each equipped with 50 caliber machine guns and crew-served rocket launchers, surrounded the tanker from 4 approach vectors. The intercept formation was textbook anti-access tactics, identical to the formations Iranian naval doctrine has published in training manuals dating back to 2019. This was not improvised. This was rehearsed. The Iranian Maritime Security Force, which operates under the Revolutionary Guard Naval Command, issued a radio communication ordering the Heritage Explorer to halt engines and prepare for boarding. The communication, which has been obtained and verified by maritime security firm Dryad Global, cited violations of international maritime law and environmental protocols related to alleged discharge violations. Captain Henrik Larsen, the Norwegian master of the Heritage Explorer, complied immediately. Within 18 minutes, an Iranian boarding team was on deck. Within 40 minutes, the tanker was under Iranian control and being escorted toward Bandar Abbas. Received. That is announcement number 1. Now here's where this gets significantly more complicated. HMS Duncan, which was operating in the area as part of Britain's Operation Sentinel, the UK-led maritime security mission launched in 2019, was positioned approximately 22 nautical miles northeast of the seizure location at the time of the intercept. 22 nautical miles is roughly 40 kilometers. That is not over the horizon. That is well within radar detection range. That is well within communications range. HMS Duncan absolutely knew what was happening in real time. Announcement number 2, the British Royal Navy chose not to intervene. This is the part that changes everything, and it is the part the UK Ministry of Defence is actively trying to obscure in their public statements. The official statement released by the Royal Navy 7 hours after the seizure claimed that HMS Duncan was engaged in routine patrol operations and became aware of the situation only after the Heritage Explorer had been boarded. That statement is contradicted by maritime tracking data, radio intercept logs, and statements from crew members aboard other vessels in the area. The British destroyer was tracking the situation from the beginning. The decision not to intervene was deliberate. Why? Because the tactical calculus is unwinnable. 8 fast boats, each capable of maneuvering at 50+ knots in shallow coastal waters, cannot be effectively engaged by a single destroyer without risking escalation into a shooting war. If HMS Duncan had moved to intercept, Iranian coastal anti-ship missile batteries, including the Ghadar system with a range exceeding 300 kilometers, would have locked targeting radar on the destroyer. The scenario war-gamed in every Western Naval Staff College ends the same way. Either the British warship retreats, or it fires and triggers a regional conflict that the UK has no appetite and no capability to sustain. Captain Marcus Wilson, a retired British Royal Navy officer who commanded destroyers in the Gulf between 2018 and 2022, stated in an interview with The Telegraph this morning, and I am quoting him directly here, "The reality is that we do not have the force structure to protect commercial shipping in a contested littoral environment against a numerically superior and geographically advantaged adversary. Sending one destroyer to patrol the Strait of Hormuz is a political gesture, not a military strategy." Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the so-called urgent response from London becomes impossible to ignore as anything other than theater. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The British response is not a military response. It is a diplomatic scramble designed to avoid admitting that Britain no longer has the naval capacity to operate independently in the Persian Gulf. Within 6 hours of the seizure, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy issued a statement condemning the action as illegal and demanding the immediate release of the Heritage Explorer and its 22-member crew. The statement called for diplomatic engagement and consultation with international partners. Notice what the statement did not call for: military action, naval escort reinforcements, freedom of navigation operations, any of the traditional responses a naval power would deploy when its commercial vessels are seized in international or contested waters. Then 4 hours later, Lammy held a call with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. According to Reuters, which cited 2 officials familiar with the call, the British side requested American naval support for future escort operations. The American side, according to the same sources, responded that U.S. Fifth Fleet assets are stretched across multiple theaters and cannot provide dedicated escorts for British commercial traffic. In other words, Britain asked America to do what Britain can no longer do itself, and America said no. This is not a minor diplomatic setback. This is a geopolitical verdict. When the United Kingdom, a nuclear-armed permanent member of the UN Security Council, cannot protect its own flagged vessels without asking the United States for help, and the United States declines, that is the operational end of British blue water naval power projection in the Middle East. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The first story is about the Heritage Explorer, the diplomatic negotiations, the insurance premiums, the rerouted tankers. That is the surface narrative. The second story is about the systematic erosion of Western military credibility in the Persian Gulf and the regional realignment that erosion is accelerating. Iran did not seize the Heritage Explorer because of environmental violations or territorial water incursions. Iran seized the Heritage Explorer because it can. Because it has developed an asymmetric naval capability that neutralizes conventional Western superiority in confined waters. Because it has calculated correctly that neither Britain nor the United States is willing to start a shooting war over a tanker carrying Norwegian crude to a Dutch port under a British flag. Think carefully about what this represents. When a regional power can seize the commercial vessels of a NATO member state in one of the most surveilled waterways on Earth, while that NATO member's warship watches from 22 nautical miles away and does nothing, and then issues a diplomatic statement instead of a military response, that is not ambiguity. That is not restraint. That is deterrence failure. The Iranian calculation is ruthlessly pragmatic. Britain has one Type 45 destroyer in the Gulf. One. The Royal Navy's surface fleet has been cut by more than 60% since 1990. HMS Duncan operates alone because there is no relief rotation available. There is no battle group. There is no carrier strike force within 2,000 miles. If Iran escalates, Britain's options are to retreat or to drag the United States into a conflict Washington explicitly does not want. Meanwhile, the regional powers are watching. Saudi Arabia is watching. The UAE is watching. Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, they are all watching. And what they see is that Britain, the former colonial power that drew every border in the Middle East, cannot defend a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. That perception will shape defense procurement decisions, diplomatic alignments, and security partnerships for the next decade. If you operate a business dependent on Gulf energy imports, what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not a foreign policy story. It is a cost structure story. If you are invested in European energy markets, this is not a headline. It is a portfolio risk. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to 431 BC, the Peloponnesian War. Athens, the dominant naval power in the Greek world, fought Sparta, the dominant land power, for 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves. Tens of thousands died. Entire cities were destroyed. And when the war finally ended in 404 BC, who benefited? Neither Athens nor Sparta. The real winner was Macedon, a northern kingdom that had stayed out of the fight, built its strength quietly, and within 2 generations under Philip II and his son Alexander, conquered the entire Greek world. Britain is Athens. Iran is Sparta. Both are locked in a confrontation that neither can decisively win. Britain cannot eliminate Iran's asymmetric naval capabilities without a full-scale war it cannot afford. Iran cannot project power beyond its immediate region without risking annihilation from American air power. So they posture. They seize tankers. They issue statements. They conduct naval patrols that accomplish nothing. And while they do this, who benefits? China? China, which imports more than 11 million barrels of oil per day, 70% of which transits the Strait of Hormuz. China, which has brokered diplomatic agreements between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China, which is building port facilities, refining infrastructure, and energy storage capacity across the Gulf region. China, which does not need to patrol the Strait of Hormuz because it has economic leverage over every actor in the region. Beijing is watching this seizure and drawing exactly the conclusion it wants. The era of Western military dominance in the Middle East is ending. The parallel is exact. Britain exhausts itself confronting Iran. The U.S. diverts resources from the Pacific to manage Middle Eastern security architecture that is collapsing. And China expands its Belt and Road infrastructure, locks in energy contracts at favorable terms, and waits. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, diplomatic resolution. Britain negotiates the release of the Heritage Explorer and its crew within 7 to 14 days. Iran extracts concessions, likely related to frozen assets or sanctions relief, and releases the vessel without formal admission of wrongdoing. Britain declares victory, Iran declares sovereignty, and nothing structurally changes. Shipping insurance premiums remain elevated. British flag tankers continue rerouting. The seizure becomes a template that Iran can repeat whenever it calculates the benefit outweighs the diplomatic cost, likelihood 70%. This is the path of least resistance. Both sides get a face-saving outcome, and the underlying power dynamic remains unchanged. Path 2, military escalation. Britain, possibly with US support, conducts a freedom of navigation operation in Iranian territorial waters or attempts to escort future tankers with armed naval presence. Iran responds with harassment operations, warning shots, or another seizure. Tensions escalate into a limited exchange of fire. Oil prices spike above $140 per barrel. Global markets panic. The U.S. is dragged into a confrontation it tried to avoid. Likelihood 15%. Possible, but requires political will in London and Washington that does not currently exist. Path 3, strategic withdrawal. Britain reduces or ends its independent naval presence in the Gulf, effectively ceding maritime security to U.S. Fifth Fleet or regional actors. British commercial shipping either pays higher insurance premiums and accepts seizure risk or reflag vessels under different registries. The Royal Navy refocuses on the North Atlantic and home waters. The Persian Gulf becomes an American and eventually Chinese sphere of influence. Likelihood 15% in the next 6 months, 40% within 3 years. This is the long-term trajectory. Britain lacks the resources for sustained Gulf deployment, and yesterday's seizure exposes that reality. I think we are closer to Path 1 in the immediate term, but drifting toward Path 3 in the strategic term. The Heritage Explorer will likely be released after quiet negotiations. Britain will claim diplomatic success. But the structural reality is unchanged. The Royal Navy cannot protect British commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz against determined Iranian opposition. Every shipping company, every insurance underwriter, every regional government now understands that. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Britain cannot protect its own tankers, what does that mean for the security architecture of the Gulf that has relied on Western naval power for 70 years? Second, how do regional actors like Saudi Arabia and the UAE recalibrate their security partnerships when they see a British destroyer spectate during a tanker seizure? Third, how does this change China's calculations about the durability of American security commitments in the Middle East? Tell me in the comments what you think Britain should have done differently. Tell me if you think HMS Duncan should have intervened, and if so, how. Tell me if you believe this seizure was truly about environmental violations or if it was a calculated demonstration of power. We will keep tracking every development in the Strait of Hormuz, in Bandar Abbas, and in the diplomatic channels between London and Tehran. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Persian Gulf beyond the headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, because this story is far from over, and we will see you in the next analysis.